Okay, we are live. Welcome to the stream. Um, Welcome if you're new. What to talk about? So, the last week has been dominated by a couple of strands of news that are easily connected. One bit of news is that the Earth dynamic system, I don't want to call it climate change because climate is the least of your problems at this point. The Earth dynamic system is behaving strangely. Sea ice extent in the Arctic is at a record minimum, and it dropped rather suddenly at the very end. A bit strange. Of course, it can happen statistically, and yet it did happen. This after basically 2 years of record warm oceans globally. So not too surprising that the sea ice fell off a cliff at the very end of the year. And here in the U.S., we are having a very, very strange hurricane season. Most of the hurricanes that have hit the continental U.S., mainland U.S., I should say, have originated not in the South Atlantic off of Africa, but instead right in our backyard in the Caribbean Sea and or the Gulf of Mexico. And they come ashore very quickly and spin up rapidly into very dangerous storms. In fact, what's it been now? 3 weeks, maybe a month since Hurricane Noreen came ashore unexpectedly as a very powerful Category 4 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, hit the Florida Panhandle, pretty much destroyed areas that have been destroyed many times in the last few years, multiple times now. This has happened. In fact, that was the second hurricane to hit that part of Florida, the west side of Florida, in basically 2 weeks. And then it went inland, which is unusual. Generally, hurricanes die as soon as they get very far away from the ocean, which is where they get their energy to spin up. Went inland and dumped an cataclysmic amount of water in the states of Georgia, South Carolina, and predominantly, turns out, even further inland in the western portion of the state of North Carolina. And the western portion of the state of North Carolina is highly mountainous. Used to be, these were poor mountain communities, but surprisingly to me, because I hadn't heard anything about it, the area has been gentrified and upgraded, and there's very wealthy people living on very wealthy farms and large mansions in modern communities with 4-lane highways, taking them their food, bread and their butter and their everything else, and they just got destroyed. The western part of North Carolina has just been basically erased and will probably stay in the state of erasure, possibly forever. Not out of the question. The damage is so widespread, and it's going to be so difficult to fix for such a small number of people, right? It may never be done. It just may not be worth it, because it's going to be many tens of billions of dollars to fix that. So on top of that, things are happening in Europe. Europe has had a series, now many summers in a row, a series of droughts, a series of heat waves, and paradoxically, a series of flood events, mostly around the Mediterranean Sea. Italy has been flooded. Turkey has been flooded. Of course, the Middle East gets flooded. And just recently, 2 years in a row now, 2 years running, Spain got flooded. Oh, and by the way, when Spain is not flooding, Spain is on fire, as I guess it was Portugal was on fire even just a month ago, maybe a month and a half. They had cataclysmic fires that were running people out of their towns and cities and setting fire to everything. And now Spain just got a calamitous amount of rainfall in the region of Valencia. And that's what I want to talk about today. Yes, I took a long time getting to that, but I'm trying to set context. Now, I don't spend a lot of time on this channel talking about the weather. I'm not a meteorologist, and besides, we can all see what's happening in the weather. What I tried to do is bring attention to the different ways that either these things are happening, the context in which they're happening, the series of events that lead up to them or that come after. And in this case, as regards Spain, I want to talk about not the amount of flood and the amount of rainwater, where it fell and how long it rained and all this numberology, right? I want to talk about how people responded to it, because that's the part that's interesting to me. I have given up on, this is their word for it, fighting climate change, okay? We're not doing that. I have given up, completely given up on reducing emissions, whatever that is. You tell me. I've given up on, anyone, anywhere, of any kind, man, woman, or child, ever taking climate action, whatever that is. None of these things are going to happen. We are not headed for a controlled demolition. Oh, we're going to get a demolition. Oh, absolutely. We are headed for an uncontrolled demolition. And that's just how it's going to be at this point. That's all we get. We get an uncontrolled demolition. And I'm resigned to that, and you should be resigned to that too. Now, when you become resigned to your fate, it does kind of open a door to what you might do next. And my favorite go-to example is, of course, the ocean liner Titanic. If for a while people kind of didn't know what was happening. Did we hit something? What did we hit? What was it? An iceberg? What difference does that make? Oh, that's bad? Oh, okay. It split the ship. There's water coming in. Oh, okay. Well, are they getting the water out? Is there some way that they can do that? Do they have technology to manage the water? They do? Oh, they don't? Oh, well, then what happens? The water's coming. And so there's a period of time when you have enough sensible questions to be engaged with the problem. And then at some point, either someone tells you or just dawns on you because you've got enough information that you realize that you have to get off of this ship. You have to get off. This ship's going down. Maybe there'll be a miracle. Maybe they'll pull some rabbit out of the hat, but not allowing for that, this ship is going down. So now what? And it's the now what moment that I'm interested in at this point. Now what? And people will get to the now what moment. And, the passengers on the Titanic, some of them got to the now what moment sooner than some others. And as you can well imagine, there were some people on the Titanic who never got to the now what moment until they were up to their neck in water and they were treading water in the North Atlantic. Then they're probably saying, now what? Finally they're in the water and the ship is sinking, or maybe they're in the ship and the ship is sinking and they feel it sinking, and now they're going, now what? Treading water in a sinking ship. Now what? So there's always going to be somebody who waits to the last second, even as they're submerging below the water. They're finally saying, uh-oh, now what? Or there's the early adopters who see the signs and read the handwriting on the wall, and they walk away from that going, well, that's a thing. Now what? So I'm interested in what people do if they ever walk away from something saying, uh-oh, now what? So the people in Spain, I want to pick on the people in Spain. Spain is a modern country. Spain has a very long history. I didn't even know this, but Spain still has a king and a queen, right? So, they really have no excuse not to be able to get their shit together. But it hasn't happened. They've had 2 years now of record floods in Spain. And I know this because I did a Google search looking for, how you do, right? Floods in Spain. And of course, you get some current news, and you start scrolling through the current news. Oh, here's the floods in Spain. Wow, look at that. This city, that city. Look at all these cars. Look at these people standing on the roof. You're scrolling down, and then you start noticing the dates. And it's like 12 months ago, 9 months ago. So, oh, this isn't the first. Look, it's the same pictures. Cars, floating down rivers, and people standing on their roofs, and swift water rescues and helicopters pulling people off the roof of their house. But it's 12 months ago. It's last year. Oh, Interesting. So this isn't the first one. And, unless you're actively digging, unless you live in Spain, you don't know what's happening in Spain. Yeah, they're in trouble. Spain is in big trouble. I don't know why. I don't really care. I don't need to know why. I don't need to know why Spain is now in trouble. But they are. Let's switch over to our picture-in-picture, and we'll bring up some of the recent stuff. So here we are. These are the pictures of cars piled up two cars deep. Cars piled on top of other cars in the streets of Spain. Let me go back to my browser. This is Spain. These are streets turned into rivers. These are streets covered in mud. Of course, the water eventually recedes. This is a canal filled with cars and debris and people standing around looking and wondering what just happened. This is a guy trying to... Look at this road. Would you just look at this, please? This is a guy walking on debris and automobiles, trying to get away from something or trying to get to something. Now, here I have to say the terrible thing. It's right here in the caption. Hundreds are dead in Spain's flood. This image, 2 days ago. This is 2 days ago. It's already hundreds are dead. The sad reality is they don't even know. They don't even know how many people are dead. Spain is a modern European country. They've got international airports. They've got meteorological, divisions. They have their own satellites in space. They have everything going for them. They have it all figured out. And these are modern people with modern cars. And right now they can't even tell you how many dead there are. And why is that? Because they're inept? Because they're corrupt? No, it's because the scope of the disaster is so huge. It is simply incomprehensible. I have heard that today, some 7 days later, none of these pictures, here's a 5-day picture, 4 days, so about 7 days later, that you can smell the dead things. I say things because, of course, it could be cats and dogs, but it's also going to be humans. And when they finally pull every car out of every street and out of every ditch, and then they dig the bodies out of the cars, because that's how this went down, then they're going to finally know what the death toll is. Will they ever tell us? No. Will they ever tell the people of Spain? Of course not. Valencia is a major tourist attraction. That's probably why you've heard of it. And so the first thing they're going to do is clean up the mess and immediately start running ads in all the major Western papers and periodicals about how wonderful Valencia is, and do come back, and spend your money in Valencia, Spain. Thank you. We love our tourists. So this is all going to be swept under the rug. That's just how they have to do it. They don't have a choice. They have to sweep this under the rug because they can't have the news about Valencia, Spain, being this. They can't have that. And they won't. They will be successful in sweeping this under the rug until next year. In all likelihood, it happens again. I mean, look at this picture. Look at this picture. It looks like it's artificially generated. It looks like the sort of thing that AI would come up with, but it's not. This is a real thing. And you see these few people standing down here at the bottom of the picture? I mean, this is, what is this? What kind of, look at this shit. What is this about? Now, this is an older picture, 4 days ago. The death toll is up to 155. I heard that many of the people, if not most of them, died in their cars. And this is both interesting and ironic. The people are complaining that they had no warning. They had no warning. So a lot of people were on the freeways, and these are major freeways. You can see a freeway like this in California or Texas or anywhere else. These are major freeways full of cars, people going to their jobs, people going to and from the airport, people going to and from the suburbs. And they got caught on the freeways in their cars, and they got swept away. And they claim there was no warning. That's hard to imagine. This is Spain. This isn't some backwards part of Bangladesh. This is the Valencia region of Spain. This is one of the most, modern places in Europe because of, the tourist trade. And it's just been completely destroyed. I mean, I'm sure there's parts of it that are reminiscent of what happened in the western part of North Carolina. And the people are bitter. They're complaining. They say we weren't warned, and they weren't this, and they weren't that. But I know they have a major, huge meteorological footprint. They have agencies, departments, local, state, federal. It's all there. It's well funded. They put out all kinds of announcements every night on the evening news. There's the weather person pointing to the map and showing the rain coming and all this stuff. And they claim they got no warning. Now, if that's true, what does that tell you? What is that about? I'm interested in that. These people claim they had no warning, or and in some ways this is even worse. They got a warning after the event was already taking place. So if you believe that, and I don't know that I do, because some of these people could be lying just to cover themselves. Yeah, the reason why I was on the freeway, driving around willy-nilly was because I didn't get a warning. That could just be self-serving propaganda that people say, I wouldn't be on the freeway if I got a warning. Well, maybe they did. And they're just telling you that they didn't because they had things they wanted to do, quote unquote, that are more important than survival. So, they're not going to fess up to the fact that they had a warning. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they didn't get a warning until the actual floodwaters were racing through people's homes and towns and villages. In Valencia, it's possible. It's possible. But what does that tell you? Now, I heard something similar, and I noted it at the time, about what happened in North Carolina, which I've already mentioned. I heard from people in North Carolina that they had no warning, which is really kind of strange because I knew what was going to happen in North Carolina 2 days before it happened. Everyone knew Hurricane Noreen was coming ashore and that it was going to hit Florida first and then go inland. And the computer models regarding hurricanes are actually really well. It's much easier to predict what a hurricane is going to do than, say, some average rainstorm. Hurricanes are big, monstrous machines. And like any other big machine, they tend to go in a straight line, and they tend to go where they're going to go, and how much energy do they have, and how much momentum does that give them. And that's where they're going to be 2 days from now, because they have that much power. And that's we kind of know where they're going to be within a certain degree. But it doesn't matter, because if it's going into Georgia and South Carolina and you happen to live in North Carolina, well, then you better be paying attention. It's coming for you too, in all likelihood. And yet people in North Carolina were saying, oh, we didn't know. They didn't tell us. The government failed us. The government, under the Biden administration, they have responsibility for this. They didn't tell us anything. And yet I knew. I knew what was happening. I was deliberately watching. Wow, this is going to be a shit show. All right, let's see what happens. And the reason why I watch these things is not because of, it's doom porn or something like that, although it is interesting to see what the weather does. I'm interested in what's happening. What is it going to do? What is it going to do that's weird? What is it going to do that turns out to be unexpected? I'm interested in how the weather is spinning out of control. And so I watch these things. Now, I wasn't prepared for how bad it got in the western part of North Carolina. I don't live there, and I wasn't watching that carefully. But there was going to be a lot of rain. And I did hear 20 inches of rain, and in some places they got more than 20, but still 20 inches of rain is enough to, destroy these mountain communities, especially the ones that live near the rivers and the streams, because those are going to overflow. So I knew. And if I was living in that part of the country, knowing what I knew, I would probably get the hell out 2 days ahead of time. But people said, and we're hearing this in Spain too, they didn't tell us. They didn't warn us. We didn't know. And that's interesting. And that's why I'm here talking about Spain. And that's why I'm including North Carolina in this video. People are claiming, take it for what you will, that nobody told them. Nobody told them. And that's interesting, isn't it? Here we are. Western industrialized civilization. Hundreds of weather satellites aloft in geostationary orbit. Every TV channel in the U.S. was carrying almost live coverage of Hurricane Noreen. And you're telling me that it just so happened that in North Carolina, which was actually in the path, was not carrying news, live news about the storm track of Noreen? Is that what you're telling me? And I get warnings on my cell phone for disasters happening in other parts of the state. I get an alert. And I guess I get the alert because people in California are so mobile that you might even be in that part of the state within a couple of hours. You might be getting on an airplane. I could be over here at San Jose International getting on an airplane, getting an alert. Oh, what's this? And on my cell phone about something happening in Los Angeles, and my flight is going to LA, Burbank or something. And I'd like to know that. Okay, so we get all kinds of alerts on our cell phones. We get weather alerts, we get Amber alerts, we get all kinds of crap. And you're supposed to pay attention to it. And I always do. I always click on it and say, "Oh, wait, this is LA. I don't have to worry about this because I'm not going there." Are you trying to tell me that the people in North Carolina, wealthy parts of North Carolina, because I saw the houses, I saw the farms, I saw the cars they were driving and the trucks, and I saw the lifestyles they were living because they were all over the news, that the wealthy parts of North Carolina don't have cell phones? That the wealthy communities in North Carolina don't have alert systems? That these people don't get the news? Or that they're so ignorant and so illiterate that they don't watch? I mean, that's what you expect me to believe when the people in North Carolina say, "Oh, we had no warning. The Biden administration totally let us down." Really? Really? Is that what's happening? Now, I can infer from that maybe your county sheriff, who maybe has some responsibility for, making the decision, the call to put out an alert at the county level. Maybe the sheriff dropped the ball. What was he? Was he drunk? Was he having sex with his mistress and couldn't be interrupted? I don't know. What was he doing? Was he at church praying to God? I don't know what he was doing. Couldn't he stop doing that and approve for the people to send out a all hands on deck message to everyone's cell phone in the zip codes that would be going to be affected? He didn't do it. That's what people are telling me. He didn't do it. And the people in Spain are saying, no one told us. This is behavior that I find interesting and fascinating. I really do. Another data point for you. I've mentioned this before on this channel, and this is a good time to mention it again. In the state of Florida, the Florida legislature, and this was this year, 2024, but I think it was like spring, unless I'm misremembering, recently. The Florida legislature passed, and Ron DeSantis, the governor, signed into law a provision that it is illegal in the state of Florida to mention climate change. Now, I don't know if there are restrictions, because it seems like that kind of doublethink could really only apply to government business or, state, local, county, whatever. Government business. The government business, new legislation, new debates, new school curriculum, anything that's going to be new at the government level can't, or new nonprofits or whatever, cannot mention climate change. Okay, and I even still have it. I did kind of a spoof about that, and I printed out this piece of paper. My wife noticed it recently, and every time I wanted to use the words climate change, I would just hold this up, okay, because might be people in Florida listening to my video, and they're not allowed to hear the words climate change. I assume I can still put them on a piece of paper in California. Okay, I think I can still do that because I'm not actually saying it, okay? So if you're in Florida, you can read the words, and they're actually in California, so you're okay. And I'm doing this tongue in cheek, okay? I'm just trying to make a point that when you start controlling language, you start controlling how people can think about things. You start controlling how people can think about things. Think about things. Think. You start controlling how people can think. And of course, that's the point. They don't really care about the words. They care about what people think. And language is how we think. We think in language. In our own skull, we think of things using language. And if you don't have language, then you can't think about something. If you can't talk about it. If you don't have the words, you can't talk about it. And therefore you can't think about it. And so that's what they're doing in Florida. They're engaging in a kind of Orwellian double think, double speak game of changing how people think by restricting the words they can use in discussion, in conversation. When the people in North Carolina or the people in Spain start saying things like, nobody warned us, I didn't know, I wasn't expecting this, I didn't know this could happen. When people start saying things like that, when there is so much information available so freely, I mean, I even knew what was going to happen in North Carolina. I knew. And I knew there was going to be live coverage. I knew there was going to be storm chasers. And I knew that there was going to be a disaster. And it's like, well, how bad is it going to be? And these people in North Carolina were claiming they didn't know. They didn't know. Why? Because they weren't allowed to know? Did the sheriff just not send out the alerts? Maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't. And why would he not? Why would he not? Why would the sheriff in North Carolina not send out a message? Why would the equivalent parties in Spain not send out the messages? Why would they just not do it? What's the harm in doing it? Well, the harm in doing it is you have to admit to it. And if you don't want to have that thought, that there's a problem here, then you don't have that thought. You just don't think about it. You just don't go there. Oh, this rain, this is going to be terrible. It's going to be 30 inches of rain. This country, this nation, Spain, whatever, North Carolina, has never seen 30 inches of rain. It's all going to fall in 5 to 8 hours. This is going to be a disaster. This is going to be completely unheard of. We're going to have images like this. Whatever the fuck this is. What is going on here? This is what we're going to have in Spain because of this rain that's coming. And then they don't tell anybody. Or people claim that they didn't know, which is not quite the same thing as them not telling you. You could not know something because you don't have the ability to think about it. I'm interested in how humanity is approaching this crisis. And what I am hearing from people when they're in the thick of the crisis, meaning the guards are down, they're desperate, they're terrified, their whole world has just ended, and they're just babbling, right? They're just saying what's on their, what they're just saying, they're raw, emotionally saying what they're saying. They're not defending themselves, they're not doing CYA, they're not making excuses, they're just blurting out what they're thinking, right? And what they're saying is, I didn't know. Nobody told me. How could this have happened? In Spain, it happened last year. Search for floods in Spain and you'll see it. It's right there. And yet people are in Valencia, people are still saying, how could this have happened? We didn't know. Nobody told us. A global climate change, which is what people call it, it's global heating. That's the physics of it. Global climate change is a thing, people. It's an actual thing. It's real for reals, okay? And it's here. And it's to stay. And it's going to get worse. And if you don't like your climate now, well, you're going to like it a hell of a lot less next year and the year after that. This is real. This is here. It's not going anywhere. It's only going to get worse. And it's going to get worse for decades, if not centuries. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine this shit show? This picture right here? And this picture and this bullshit here, can you imagine this getting worse for decades, least of all a century? Well, that's what's on deck. Okay, that's what's actually happening. This is early days. Now, let's say this happens again in Valencia next year, or the next town over, or the next district over. What are they going to say? Are they going to say, Ermagerd, I didn't know. What is this? We got no warning. No one told us anything. Well, how could this be possible? We're a modern country. What? When? I don't understand. My house, my car, I was in my car. My husband was driving to work like a regular day. Why was he driving to work? It's not a regular day. You're getting flooded. Yes, but we didn't understand. You didn't understand? What's your fucking problem? Because you clearly have a fucking problem that you didn't understand and no one told you. And maybe someone didn't tell you. Well, if they didn't tell you, it's because they didn't understand either. What is wrong with these people? What is wrong with these people? Well, I can tell you what's wrong with them. I can tell you exactly what's wrong with them. Language. They're not being told. And when the alert finally comes, and it's 1 hour before the fucking event, so like, what good is that going to do? But when it finally comes, they're like, what is this? Oh, this is weird. An alert for floods? Wait, floods? What if in Valencia, Spain? And we have a drought. There's not going to be any flood. Oh, well, whatever. And there's no space in their brain. Like I like to say, there's no flood-shaped slot in their thinking where they can say flood. Oh my God, there's a flood coming? Okay, well, where are the children? Where's the dog? Get to the second floor, blah, blah, blah. They don't have a place in their brain for the word flood to reside. They get the alert. They see the news broadcast the night before. Oh yeah, flood's coming. Oh, okay, fine, floods. Oh, whatever. And just it doesn't integrate. And the reason it's not integrating is because we have outlawed the use of the word climate change. If you happen to be in Florida. Or if you're in Western North Carolina, Donald Trump country, then you're a MAGA head and you just self-censor. You just self-censor. So that if the news maven is saying, oh wow, torrential floods are coming for North Carolina, the remnants of Hurricane Noreen, you're like, floods coming to North Carolina. Yeah, I'd love to see that. That'll be the day, according to Donald Trump, it's all a hoax. And I like the sound of that. So there's not any floods coming to North Carolina. You people are just full of it. It's full of shit. You're just trying to convince me that global warming is a problem. And I don't believe it because it's a hoax because Donald Trump said so. And he's a valedictorian in all the fields of science. So if he says it's a hoax, it probably is. That's the right answer anyway, so I'm just going to believe it. And there's no hole, there's no space in their brain. There's no cognitive slot where the thought can reside that they are in the crosshairs of an absolute raging disaster. And it's the same thing in Spain. Frankly, it wouldn't have even mattered if the notice had gone out. And frankly, the fact that they're saying the notice did not, it only tells me they probably weren't paying attention. And it might be that the sheriff in the western part of North Carolina, the authorities there, the county authorities and the local sheriffs, maybe they did send out the message. But people were so busy being, denialists that it just didn't have any place to reside. Because if you don't talk about things and you don't have the words and you are deprived of the conversation and you're not allowed to incorporate certain concepts into your thinking, this up here, which you use to save yourself, okay? If you're not allowed to be educated, you're not allowed to have that discussion, you're not allowed to think about it in advance, then when the day comes, you're not ready. Even if the alerts go out, you're not ready. Even if they tell you the day before, you're still not ready. And when the floodwaters are coming down your street and it's a wall of water and it's pushing trees ahead of it and you're standing there like a chimp gawking with your jaw hanging open, you're still not ready. And what's it take to get people ready? We have to have the adult conversation. We have to face this like it's a real thing, because it is, and it's going to stay real, and it's never going to become fake, and it's never going away, and it only gets worse, because that's all it can do. Because physics is real. Physics wins. Just like gravity wins. Gravity is always there, even if you think it's not. Even if you have a parachute. If your parachute fails, gravity wins. Because gravity never went anywhere. You're just playing games with gravity. Because physics is real. And jumping out of airplanes with a parachute only makes sense if you think you can beat gravity. But it never went away just because you have a parachute. Gravity is still there. And if your parachute fails, you're going to learn that the hard way. Oh, my parachute's not working. Well, why am I falling? I should be up in there in that airplane. Goodbye, airplane. I really wish I was up there right now. And now, gravity. And global heating and the resulting climate change, if you're lucky, that's all you get. Or maybe like in North Carolina or Spain, you get destroyed. I wouldn't call that climate change. What do you want to call that? A cataclysm? Annihilation? Get out your thesaurus. Get out your dictionary. Try to find adequate words to describe what's happening. It sure as fuck ain't climate change. This shit going down in Valencia is a long way from climate change. This is not climate change. This is not climate change. This shit is not climate change. This is not climate change. Where's the climate change in any of this? Show me the climate change. Show me the fake. Show me the it's blown out of proportion. Show me where this isn't real. Show me where this is a hoax. Show me where all of this is temporary, and we can innovate, and we can find a way to get around this. Show me where any of this admits of a solution. Show me where any of this admits of a solution. One solution, even name one. You can't even touch this with all of your techno-triumphalism. You can't even touch this. Can't even get close. Because 20 inches of rain in 5 hours is 20 fucking inches of rain. You can't do anything with. And 20 inches of rain in Appalachia in western North Carolina is impossible. It's like gravity. You just jumped out of an airplane without a parachute. Now you're going to learn something about gravity. You're fighting physics, people. This is all physics. All this shit, this is all physics. You're fighting physics. You're losing. You're always going to lose. You will lose forever. And this losing, this big L, is going to go on for decades. Except that it gets worse for decades. That's the shit show. This is the show now. This is the deal. This is the show that we're all going to have to watch for the rest of our lives. And it's interesting to me that even now, at this late date, people still can't have an adult conversation about this. And they will claim, and who am I to doubt them? They will claim they didn't know. Nobody told them. Satellites in space that watch this shit for days developing. Entire meteorological departments funded at the federal level that have nothing else to do all day but issue alerts. And they didn't know. Everybody in Valencia, Spain, down to the 12-year-old children, have a smartphone capable of getting alerts. The technology exists. Everyone has it. And they didn't know. Nobody told them. That's their claim. And maybe it's true. Someone dropped the ball then. Someone who had a satellite view from space of this coming disaster just didn't tell anybody. How the hell does that happen? Are these people scientists or are they not? You have the data, you have the satellite images, and they've been showing them on the nightly news for days ahead of the actual event, and yet no one sent out an alert? I find that highly suspicious. It's more likely that they did send out an alert. But people don't understand because they don't have this conversation ahead of need. By the time you're floating in your car down a river along with 40 other drivers heading out to sea in death, it's too late. You know what you need, but now you can't have it. We need to have these conversations. We need to analyze this, talk about this, find out what went wrong, and talk to the people. Now in Florida, you couldn't have that conversation, you see. Because if you're an official in the state of Florida, you can't mention climate change. So you can't talk about why this is happening over and over and over and over and over again. Because you're not allowed to. So people in Florida will never have this discussion. And all I can say to them is, you wanted it this way. So suck it up, buttercup. You're never going to know what hit you. You'll never know what hit you. And maybe that is some comfort. You simply never know. You're in your house, you're cooking the dinner, and the house starts to shake, and then you're dead. And pretty soon, they're fishing your body out of a debris field on the beach in Florida, and you never knew there was a hurricane coming. Or you never knew it was a Category 5. Or you never knew that it would blow the storm surge in that far. And you never knew that your house was vulnerable. And you never knew what a storm surge was. And you can't have these conversations. Now, you can talk about weather, but no one can come to your community and tell people that you're vulnerable, because you'll ask them why. And then they'll say climate change. Oh, except they can't say that. You'll always be vulnerable. You will be vulnerable forever, because climate change, sorry. Never goes away. And it only gets worse. Now, the reason I'm actually having this conversation about Spain, and let's see if I can find the dear gentleman, is because the King of Spain, is this him? The King of Spain, I probably have to do a search for the King of Spain. It doesn't matter. Spain has a king. Now, the king hasn't mattered in Spain since, who was it? Nelson or Raleigh, one of the admirals of England, sank the Spanish Armada. Okay, back in what it was, 1600, right? The King of Spain hasn't mattered much. They have probably a constitutional monarchy. You never hear about the King of Spain. We hear more about the King of England than the King of Spain. So the King of Spain and his wife show up in the flood-ravaged region, and what are they going to do? Hand out platitudes? He doesn't have any power, or he can't manage anything. And besides which, what people really needed was warning, and they didn't get that, or so they claim. Believe what you want to believe. And now he shows up, and what do the people do? Thank you for coming. We really rely on the government, and now the king is here. We trust that the king will help manage the government response, and blah, blah. No, they don't. Of course not. They throw mud and rocks and garbage at the king. He looks like a nice guy. He's really tall. He's very handsome. And, he's walking out there in the mud, all right, with the people and trying to be kingly, and they're throwing garbage at him. And they're throwing garbage at him, and the things they're saying is like, where has the government been? You're the king. You're supposed to get the government in motion. They're supposed to be here to help us, and blah, 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 blah. It's like, what should he say to all that? He's not going to talk about climate change, because now it's a disaster. Oh, that would be, really rude and insensitive. Talk about climate change at a time like this. Okay, well, maybe he should. Maybe somebody should, but they won't. Of course they won't. And then later, when the disaster's done, they still won't, because it's politically unpopular to talk about climate change and global heating. Why? Because it's threatening, because it will interfere with tourism, because it will, make women not want to have children, and we have a demographic crisis already, and because people might leave the country, and because, 2 catastrophic floods 2 years running starts to draw a line, and the line is pointing at get the fuck out of Spain, okay? And they don't want to talk about it, and they want to forget everything, and this disaster, we'll clean it up, and we'll clean up the roads, and we'll bury the bodies, and we'll get the cars out, and, and part them out, and put them in the landfill somewhere. We'll make everything nice and pretty. And, and then we'll have 9 months, 8 months, whatever, of not talking about climate change until the next big storm comes and kills us all again. And then we'll clean it up again, and we'll get the tourists back, and we'll get their money. And, and this blah, blah, blah. You see, they're in this loop, right? They're in this self-destructive, denialist, can't face it, can't have an adult conversation loop. And part of it is manifesting in this interesting meme coming out of Spain and also came out of North Carolina that nobody told us. Oh, really? Nobody told you? Oh, I can promise you they knew. Somebody did. So if you want a conspiracy, it's not that scientists are conspiring to create climate change. That's not your conspiracy. You want a real conspiracy? I got one for you. They don't want you to know. And it's working. They don't want you to know. And it's working. And in Florida, you can't even talk about, in Florida. Why? Because they don't want you to know. And it's working. Clearly it's working. They don't want you to know. And them not wanting you to know has actually been enshrined in state law in the state of Florida. They don't want you to know. And something's going on in Spain. These people claim they didn't know. Oh, really? That's interesting. Maybe they didn't want you to know. And this is the second time they've had catastrophic floods. You go search for floods in Spain, and you keep going down the list, and finally you'll get out of the current flood, and you'll get into the older flood. A year ago, 9 months ago. It looks exactly the same. And people claim they didn't know, or they didn't believe it, or no one got them the message, or whatever it was. That's interesting, isn't it? This is 2 years in a row. I mean, maybe you'd excuse it the first time. They didn't take it seriously. But I can promise you, someone knew that time also. Back last year, this time, they knew. And maybe they said something, maybe they didn't. But this year, they still knew. And people are claiming, we got no warning. We didn't know. The reason my husband was on the freeway going to work is because he didn't know. No one told us. Or we wouldn't have done that. He wouldn't have been on the freeway being washed away and drowned and killed and lost, never to be recovered. Okay? We would have done something differently. But they didn't tell us. And they're so mad at the king because his government is so, corrupt, feckless, useless? I don't know what the problem is with the Spanish government. Maybe those aren't problems at all. Maybe people are just making this up. But they threw mud and debris at the king of Spain as he was coming to talk to them and help them and give them hope. And they were pelting him with garbage. Where's my government? Why didn't you tell us? It's serious. Now that it's happened, you see. But it wasn't serious before because nobody knew. Nobody was told. Nobody was warned. I guess it's not a serious thing. And then they're all dead. And then their homes are destroyed. And their businesses are washed away. And there's mud a foot thick in the streets. And it's going to take 6 months to clean it up. And they're going to be in a big hurry because tourist season. Just in time for the next disaster. And they'll always claim they didn't know. Every time will be new. We don't remember anything about the last one. These things don't happen in Spain. These things don't happen in North Carolina. These things don't happen in the U.S. Southeast. Oh, yes, they do. Absolutely they do. They happen every 2 weeks. If you're in Florida, on the west side of Florida, you get hurricanes like Helene every 2 weeks. So don't tell me it doesn't happen here. Because it happened 2 weeks in a row. Actually, factually. That's not even science. That's just news. What happens next year? Are they still going to claim it doesn't happen here? Yeah, they will actually. And part of the reason why they have to claim it doesn't happen is because in Valencia, they're dependent on tourism for their money. And they can't let the news get out that it can happen here. That can't be the story. Even though it's happened 2 years in a row in some part of Spain, it can't. The news is always going to be, it can't happen here. Come to Spain. Spend your vacation. Leave your money behind because it can't happen here. And it's the same thing in North Carolina. Go live up in the hills. We have a 4-lane freeway up to these communities in the mountains, and because nothing bad can ever happen here. They have to say that. Money, economy, economic growth, jobs. They have to say that. They have to say it can't happen here. And they have to ban the words, once again, in the state of Florida, to basically reinforce that it can't happen here. Oh, and by the way, it doesn't. Oh, and by the way, it never did. In Florida, they will never have the conversation. Because they're banning words that you would need to use in a sentence as part of a conversation. Banning words that would be necessary to have the conversation itself. So yeah, you can worry about the Arctic sea ice. You could worry about the AMOC. You could worry about the terminal decline of the Greenland ice sheet. You can worry about the Doomsday Glacier. You can worry about record, high ocean temperatures. You can worry about all these things and all the numbers and all the studies and all the charts and all the figures and all the algorithms and all the satellite images. You can worry about that. You can obsess about that. You can spend all your time going to every YouTube video and looking at all the charts and getting all wound up about that shit. Meanwhile, I'm the only one anywhere on the entire planet telling you the truth, which is that you can't talk about this. You can obsess about it, but you can't talk about this. You can't talk about this with your family. You can't talk about this with your neighbors. You can't go to your government and talk about this. You can't go to your federal governments, your state governments, any level and talk about this. You can't even go to the scientists and talk about this. We are not having this conversation. We will not have this conversation. They won't let us have this conversation. And you don't want to have this conversation. I am here having this conversation with you, and I'm asking you to have this conversation. Have this conversation. Use the words. Keep the words. Don't let the words vanish. Don't let the words be taken away. And don't blame the King of Spain. And don't even blame the government. And for pity's sake, don't blame the fossil fuel companies for this. This is not their doing. All these cars, all these freeways, all these miles driven, all these people killed in their cars, all this money washed down the drain, out to sea. All these cars have to be scrapped. All these bodies have to be buried. All of this is us. We did this. This street is full of ruined cars and dead bodies because we were there. We bought the cars. We are dependent on the cars. We're in the cars for everything we do. And in the end, we'll be killed in our cars. And that's us. We did that. We put these cars here. I know the floods gathered them together and piled them on top of each other and brought in the mud and brought in the debris and drowned all the victims and all that. That's all the floods. But we did this. We did this. Those cars are there in that street. And they'll be there, of course, for a month. We did that. We did that. And we're doing what we're doing to the planet by burning fossil fuels. We are doing that. We will keep doing that. What's the magic number again? Do you remember? If you've been on this channel, you've heard this many, many times. What are we doing? Every single day. So these cars can be here in Spain, piled up on the middle of this road, an impenetrable barrier to progress, to even having a normal life. What are we doing every single day? We are burning 100 million barrels of crude oil a day. 100 million barrels of crude oil a day. And that number is going up. Soon it'll be 110 million barrels. Then it'll be 120 million barrels of oil. Just oil. Not the coal, not the natural gas. Just the crude oil every single day. We are doing this. These cars are here because of us. They are piled up here because of the flood. But they are here to be piled up because of us. We did this. we are doing this. It's just a little more obvious after the flood comes through and takes all the cars and piles them up into a mountain to view, to see. Well, there's your mountain of cars. That's us. We did this. And we're not going to stop. And why can't we stop? Because we can't even have that conversation. We can't even have that conversation. What would we do? How would we do it? How do we get out of this bind? How do we keep this from happening? Well, for one thing, you can't. You can't stop any of this. You can't stop this either. Just the destruction. You can't stop that. We can't stop any of this. Global heating is here. All the things are the things now. And they don't go away, and they only get worse. I mean, they go away to the extent that they get worse and they become unrecognizable. Oh, I yearn for the days when we just had 20 inches of rain in North Carolina. Well, now it's 30 inches, and next year it'll be 40. But I yearn for the days when 20 inches of rain was all we got. Yeah, it will go away only because it gets worse. Now, because it gets worse, and because this Titanic is sinking, it is going down, and it's going to get harder and harder to have this sort of a lifestyle as this continues, as our lives keep being completely annihilated out from under us. This sort of thing becomes increasingly difficult. Many of these vehicles are insured. Maybe most of them are insured to be on the road, but they're not insured for this kind of damage. Many of these homes and businesses have some insurance, but probably not for this kind of damage. In fact, in places that flood frequently, flood insurance is strictly forbidden. You can't even afford it. You'd have to pay 10 times as much for flood insurance as you do for your regular insurance, like against liability or theft, right? You have to pay 10 times as much for flood insurance. And I can promise you, everyone in this region of Valencia who tries to make a claim on their damages is going to find that they can't live here anymore because they can't afford the flood insurance. So they have to drop the flood insurance. And the next time it happens, they're not going to be insured. And so very slowly, it chips away at us until this is no longer possible. You can't have a car. You can't have a house full of furniture. You can't even have a house. Or at least you can't have a house on the ground floor, because anybody who has a house on the ground floor can't afford the insurance. And probably is retarded, stupid, and self-delusional just to live on the ground floor. You have to live on the second floor. And maybe even the third floor to not have this happen to you. And pretty soon that just becomes reality. And then can we even do any of this? Do these towns become abandoned when everyone has to live on the second floor just to avoid this kind of shit show? Yeah, maybe, possibly. Florida got hit 2 weeks running by hurricanes on the west coast of Florida and the Panhandle, and they got wiped out 3 years running by floods on storm surge and hurricanes on the west coast of Florida. 3 years running. And there were people on the west coast of Florida this year who had their houses on the market to sell, to try and get out of Florida. And they had just repaired them from the last deluge storm surge. They had just got them repaired, had just put the for sale sign out front, were looking for a buyer, was already in negotiations with a buyer, and then 2 hurricanes in a row came and wiped them out again. So what are they going to do? Do you really think they're going to get insurance payouts to fix their house for a second or third time in a row? No. They're selling because they don't have insurance and they can't afford to get wiped out. They have to get out. They fixed their house with the last of the insurance money and they're trying to get out, and they didn't. And now they're wiped out. They took all their insurance money, piled it into the house, tried to put it on the market, tried to get a sale, and they didn't. And now the house is gone again. And there's no insurance money left, and there's no insurance company. There's no policy because they couldn't afford it. So now they have nothing. They have no insurance policy, no insurance money from the last flood, and they have no house. And what do you call that? That's called a wipeout. They're wiped out. However much money they had poured into their house, including the insurance payout from the last time, is gone. It's all gone. And we just get chipped away. Chipped and chipped and chipped until finally we're just worn down to nothing. And this can't continue. It simply can't. You think it can, but it can't. You'll ignore it, but it won't go away. In fact, it only gets worse. You'll think it's a hoax, but this is not a hoax. This happened 2 years in a row. You'll think it's going to get better, but it doesn't, because it can't. Because of 100 million barrels of oil a day. Soon to be 110, soon to be 120. And all these cars will come back because the people can't survive without a car. And all these buildings will have to be repaired. Billions of US dollars in equivalent will be poured back into these communities to repair them, clean up their streets, and reestablish the businesses, and bring in new furniture, and bring in new carpet, bring in new walls, and replace all the equipment that got damaged, all the refrigerators and all the cash registers and everything else. Reestablish government services, bring in the utilities, fix the electrical grid. All this stuff is going to happen. It's going to take a year. And then hopefully in time for tourist season, they're back in business, right? Literally back in business, because that's all they can do. They don't know what else to do. And they can't think about it being over. And they can't have that conversation. And when the next thing comes and they get the alert, maybe they'll pay a little more attention to it because they got burned so badly the previous time. But maybe it won't matter if they pay attention to the alert, because there's nothing they can do. They have to be on the freeway in their car. They have to be in the restaurant. They have to be going to the school to get their kids out of school. They have to be on the road all the time. They have to burn fossil fuels. Their food comes from distant places using trucks burning fossil fuels. They have to travel all over Europe in their airplanes because that's how they relieve their stress, is having vacations in different parts of the continent. And they have to do these things. And they can't stop doing these things. And they can't ever get away. They can't escape. It will come for them again, and it will catch them again. And more people will die in their cars, and more people will die trying to save their cars. And more people will die who just didn't believe it. Just didn't believe it was true. And it continues until it doesn't. And when does it stop? It doesn't stop because we did anything. Give me a break. It doesn't stop ever. Just like gravity doesn't stop just because you forgot your parachute. And the Titanic didn't stop sinking just because the ticket said the Titanic is unsinkable. Which it did say that on the fucking ticket. Even while the ship is sinking, you could read the back of your ticket and say, oh yeah, it says right here, it's unsinkable. Well, guess what, folks? Gravity wins. And in this case, the Earth dynamic system, sorry, big words, wins. Because physics always wins. Physics always wins. And just because you're not allowed to have the discussion in the state of Florida because words are outlawed, it doesn't matter. It's not going to save you. Physics is still going to win. So what do? Well, maybe there's nothing you can do. Maybe like the people in Spain, maybe you have to get a new car, fix your house, hope for the best and keep driving. Maybe you have no choice. I suspect for most people, 99.9% of them, that's the reality. They have no choice. Now, if you were on the Titanic, I would say, well, you do have a slim chance here. If you can get to a lifeboat and get off the ship, then maybe your lifeboat won't sink, depending on how well it was built. And we don't know because we've never tested them before. But here's a lifeboat. Get yourself in it. Get your family. Here's some food and water. We'll put you in the cold, freezing North Atlantic and in the dark, and you'll be on a lifeboat when the ship sinks. And good luck with that. Okay? Hopefully you survive. I hope you have enough resources, and I hope you get lucky. And I hope some other ship comes along and hauls you out of the water and brings you on a bigger ship that isn't floating, or isn't sinking, sorry. And maybe you'll have a story to tell someday because you got lucky and you're one of the hundreds of people that survived the sinking of the Titanic that couldn't sink. And there's no positive note to end on this. This only ends in increasing, continuous, unrolling back-to-back disasters. It'll be Valencia, Spain this week, and it was North Carolina last month, and next week it'll be a different part of Spain, or it'll be a different part of Italy, or a different part of Turkey, or some other thing, and it'll be more people who you've never seen before in your life in countries you couldn't find on the map. But it doesn't matter. None of that matters. You don't have to care. It's going to happen anyway. And we're being ground down. We're being worn down until there won't be any of us to speak of. Unless you can find the equivalent of a lifeboat. You have to get yourself off of fossil fuels because that is going away. And if it doesn't go away because we want it to, which it won't, it'll go away because it must. These storms are going to hit the oil refineries. These storms are going to hit the ports. These storms are going to hit the oil fields and the gas fields. These storms are going to fill up the coal mines. It's eventually just going to hit everything, and it's all going to stop. And then what are you going to be doing? You're not going to be driving. You're not going to be flying. You're not going to have a job. The economy is going to collapse. Doom, 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 doom. No, that's just physics, people. That's just how this shit's going to play out. This is just going to continue, and it's going to get worse. And every year it gets worse. And every year more people are going to end up floating down rivers of cars, car soup, headed out to sea. Every year. Worse and worse and worse. It can't get better because of 100 million barrels of oil a day. Soon to be 110. And after that to be 120. It never gets better. It only gets worse forever until it stops getting worse. Because, what? We're all dead? I guess if we're all dead, then we can't burn any barrels of oil, can we? Least of all, 100 million. A day, every single day. We can't burn 100 million barrels of oil a day if we're dead. So yeah, it stops eventually. And we chose not to choose. We chose not to choose, and it's going to stop of its own accord. It's going to stop because it has to. Because we're dead. Because the cars are piled up to the 3rd floor in Valencia, and everyone's dead. And they'll never drive a car again. And then we're only able to burn 90 million barrels of oil a day. Still a lot of oil, but then that'll kill more people. And then, when the agricultural centers are inundated with floods and or heat waves and or fires and or the farmers are washed away, or they have to leave the fields, and the farm workers have to leave the fields, and it's too hot and no one can survive the fields, well, then there's no food. And then there's a food crisis. And then they have to leave the cities, and then they have to leave the country, and they're trying to find the food, and this just keeps going. And they go someplace where there's food, but then there's floods. And they go someplace where there's no floods, and then there's a disease outbreak because of all the dead bodies. And then they go someplace else where there's no disease, and there's hostility, and there's war. And they're not welcome. And they're met at the border with guns, okay? And that's just how this goes. And it doesn't stop doing that. It doesn't stop doing that. It never stops doing that until it stops. And why? Again, would it ever stop? Can it just go on like that infinitely with just 100 million barrels of oil a day, greasing the gears? No. It stops when we stop. Either because we're gone, or because we're too disrupted, or we've been ground down too much, or civilization has collapsed, or the economy has evaporated, or money is gone, and then what are people doing? Well, they're not driving and flying and vacationing and fretting about their vacation, and the kids in school and getting to work 40 miles away, and my commute and the price of gas, and they're not worried about any of that shit anymore. What are they doing? Survival. All right? They're with a bunch of people who they trust, and they are surviving because that's all they have left. And there will be some who don't. And then they won't be part of the story. And they can't tell a story of how they failed to survive because they're dead. And the people who do survive will have a story to tell, how they did that. And I can tell you what that story is going to sound like. It's going to sound like people coming together, setting aside their differences and their fears, recognizing that they have a shared calamity that they're going to have to pull together to survive. And they're going to form villages and other types of organizational structures. They're going to have their local governments. They're going to have their local agricultural production. They're going to have local technology, whatever level of technology that is. Maybe it's just a cow pulling a plow, okay? But still, they've got a plow and they've got a cow. They've got a domesticated animal. And that's something. And maybe they have fire. Or maybe they can make charcoal. And maybe they can smelt iron, recycle iron to make tools. Maybe they can do those things. Maybe they have that kind of level of technology. Anyway, they pull it together. They build their fences. They corral their animals. They reinvent certain levels of kitchen medicine. And they can treat basic injuries. And they educate their children. And they preserve themselves as best they can. And if you ever ask them what it was they were doing, and they had the wherewithal to answer the question and not just be dumbstruck that you would even ask, they would call it village life. 150, 200 people, maybe 350 at most, living in a village. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do, and everyone does it. And they don't question it. And they don't argue about it, and they don't elect Donald Trump, and they don't have MAGA movements, and they don't have alt-right fascist movements that are trying to keep the immigrants out and trying to purify the blood of the nation. They don't have any of that. They don't have any of that horse shit, any of that monkey shit. Horses aren't that stupid. Monkeys are that stupid, okay? It's just monkey shines. It's just monkey business. They're not going to have any of that monkey business. You go in their village and you see them toiling away every day and enjoying each other's company and enjoying their children and taking care of the elders and greeting strangers cautiously but civilly, and because you never know who's going to turn out to have an asset, right? So you treat everyone equally, and you're welcome here, and you can move on, and we don't have much to offer, but we'll share, and good luck with your journey. And if you can leave us any news or any spare materials you've got, then we'd welcome them, and basically we'd like to hear more news. As long as you can bring us a story or a song or a tale or news of the world, you're welcome here anytime. We'll put you up and we'll feed you. And that's how they're going to handle everything. They're a village. And they're isolated. And they're surviving just fine, thank you very much. Hopefully, it'll continue that way. Until the surface of the earth becomes completely uninhabitable. And then maybe only the villages that happen, just by luck, to be located north of the Arctic Circle in some part of Siberia or Canada, they're the ones who end up with the perfect climate. That word again, They end up with the perfect climate, and they can survive for centuries, while everyone else survives for years. Village life. Village life. Start thinking about it, because that's all you're going to get. And the people who survive, when they tell the stories, that's what they're going to talk about. And if you can't figure out village life, really fast, like if you can't figure out how to get into a lifeboat on the Titanic, like right now, like you've got 10 minutes to figure this shit out, right? If you can't figure out village life quickly, like in the next 18 months, then you're shit out of luck in all likelihood. Probably in the next year, 2, maybe 3. If you can't figure this out with your family and your kin and your next of kin and your neighborhood and your church and your whatever, if you can't figure this out, what is village life, then you're not going to have a story to tell. You won't be a storyteller. How we made it, what we had to do, what it was like. How did we win? Where did we lose? What would we have done differently? What did we do that was obviously correct? Looking back, that was obviously the smart move. You won't be having those conversations with people. You won't be in that story anywhere. You'll just be forgotten. And the dead tell no tales, including tales of success. They certainly don't tell tales of failure because they're dead. So the Spanish are throwing junk at the King of Spain. Well, la-di-da. I don't think that's going to save them. I don't think that's going to save them. And I don't think the King of Spain is going to back those people up and say, let me talk to you about climate change. Let me talk to you about global heating. Let me talk to you about 100 million barrels of oil a day. The King of Spain's not going to have that conversation. Are you kidding me? No, he's not. I'm sure he's a very nice man. He'd probably be, great to have a beer with and have a conversation, but he's not going to have that conversation with anybody. He's probably like everybody else. He has no place in his brain to have those thoughts. He doesn't have the words. He doesn't have the equations. He doesn't have the knowledge. He doesn't have the data. He doesn't have the reality. He doesn't understand the earth dynamic system. He doesn't understand weather. He doesn't understand how the weather's changing. He doesn't understand how the climate's changing. He doesn't understand where these floods come from. He doesn't understand the hydrologic cycle. He doesn't understand the carbon cycle. He doesn't understand satellite images. He doesn't understand charts and figures and data and tables. He doesn't understand any of it. He's the King of Spain. He's just a random dude. He was born of random people, and they put a crown on his head and a title, and now he's the King of fucking Spain. Doesn't make him a genius. It doesn't make him knowledgeable. And he sure as fuck isn't knowledgeable about the earth dynamic system and what's happening to it because of the number 100 million barrels of oil a day, soon to be 110. and then 120, and then 130, because reasons. Reasons being mostly economic growth. You don't understand any of that. He will never have this conversation with these people. Never. So who will? Nobody. Me. I'll have this conversation with you. Hey, if you're in Spain, you just learned everything you need to know about your situation. Now maybe you want to go to the king of your country and straighten him out and say, hey, dude, king, you need to help us with this. A lot of people respect you. You need to start telling people what the hell is going on. Maybe they'll listen to you. They're sure as hell not going to hear it from their local governments who are just only worried about tourist dollars. Come to Valencia. They're out there trying to clear the mud out of the streets before it gets into the global press. And the next time people hear about Valencia, Spain, they're thinking about, dead people rotting in their cars, in a riverbed. You don't want them thinking that. We got to clean this shit up so that the next time people hear anything about Valencia, Spain, it's about how clean it is and how beautiful it is and the restaurants and the hotels and the freeways full of cars. That's what we want to talk about, Valencia, Spain. So is the king going to help the people talk about anything other than that scenario? Beautiful Valencia, hotels, right? Michelin, restaurants? I doubt it. I don't think he'll ever have that conversation with people. And how about the king of England? Is he ever going to have that conversation? No. How about the king of Thailand? Is he ever going to have that conversation with people? Of course not. Perish the thought. So, no, we can't save ourselves. No, we're not going to save ourselves. No, we don't even know how to start. And worse than that, we don't even know how to have this conversation. We don't have the words for this. We don't have the leadership for this. We will never talk about this. People will be dumbfounded and confused and looking for someone to blame. And the only ones they can blame is themselves. And they will never do that. And they will also never take time to save themselves. They'll never get to the lifeboats. They'll just get in their car and they'll drive. And it'll always be 100 million barrels of oil a day until it's 110. Until it's 120 million barrels of oil a day. And at some point, it goes to 0 million barrels of oil a day, essentially. And why is that? Why is that? I wonder why that is. I wonder when it will be a 0 million barrels of oil a day. I wonder when, and I wonder why. Yeah, I'll just leave you with that thought. That's me. That's you and I. Not really talking about global climate change. Not really talking about it. Don't know what to say. Don't have the words. Don't know who to talk to. Nobody wants to talk about it. We're not going to talk about it. It's just going to happen to us. And it's going to get worse. And we're going to keep burning fossil fuels. And we're not going to get to the lifeboats. We're not going to contemplate village life. We're not going to contemplate saving ourselves. We're not going to do it. Somebody might. Somebody might. If they do, it'll be an accident. So here I am, wasting my time. I got other things to do. So I guess I better do them. Like, subscribe. I do this once in a while. Not as often as I used to because why? Honestly, why? Why would I do this? What is the point? Is there a point to any of this that I'm doing? Is there a point? Is there ever a point to anything I have to say? Where does this go? Who hears it? What difference does it make? Nothing, nothing, nothing. And yet I keep coming back. I guess I'm stuck in a rut too, just like everybody else out on the freeway driving their car 40 miles one way to get to work. Yep, it's gonna suck.